Okay, welcome back. So, if you were only catching the headlines back in, say, 2018, you probably thought Bitcoin was, well, basically done for, declared dead, right?
Oh, yeah. A failed experiment, a digital gimmick. That was the narrative.
Totally. The crazy speculation of 2017, that was long gone. Media wasn't interested anymore. Price was way down.
It really felt like, the party was over. That's what the community started calling the crypto winter. All the tourists, the hype crowd, they'd packed up and gone home.
But that's the interesting part, isn't it? What happens when all that noise dies down? When the tourists leave?
That's when the real work starts. The builders step up, the engineers, the cryptographers, the people actually committed to the tech, they just put their heads down and got to work.
Exactly. And that's our focus today. This really critical, but often kind of overlooked phase in Bitcoin's story. These quiet years, roughly 2018 through 2020, filled with just intense engineering work and honestly some deep thinking about what this all means.
It was much less about the day-to-day price swings and really all about building a system that was robust enough, solid enough for potentially global use.
We should probably start by tackling that perception gap you mentioned, because even now, so many people just boil Bitcoin down to digital money. Simple as that.
And they're just missing the bigger picture entirely. It's like seeing only one tree in a huge forest.
Yeah, the sources we looked at had this great analogy. They said, saying Bitcoin is digital money is like saying the internet is just a fancy telephone.
Exactly. It's so dismissive. It completely overlooks the actual breakthrough.
It's worse than dismissive, isn't it? It fundamentally gets the achievement wrong.
It does. Because the currency, the Bitcoin itself, that's really just the first application, the first app built on top of this much more fundamental thing,
Which is?
which is the distributed consensus platform itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Satoshi Nakamoto's invention back in 2008. What they actually did was solve the Byzantine generals problem.
Right, the BGP. Which computer scientists had been wrestling with since, what, the early 80s?
Since 1982, yeah. A really thorny problem in distributed systems.
So for anyone listening who isn't familiar, maybe a quick refresher on BGP.
Sure. Essentially, it asks this question: how can you get a whole network of computers or generals who don't necessarily trust each other to all agree on a single truth, on a single plan of action or the state of a ledger? And critically, how do they do that without any central coordinator telling them what's true?
No central authority, that's the key.
That's the key. And Bitcoin was the first system to provide a working answer that was secured by economics, by incentives, and by cryptography. It created this decentralized network that could reliably achieve consensus. So yeah, our mission today is really to unpack how that core architecture got battle-hardened, how it matured during those quiet years.
Okay, so we're kind of framing this era as having two main tracks running in parallel. Track one is those dedicated engineers, just heads down, focusing on the tech, building out the scaling tools, the security features, even while people were mocking it and the price was low. Real persistent.
The BUIDL era, as they called it. BUIDL. Just build.
Right. And track two.
Track two is maybe more subtle, but just as important. It's the huge philosophical shift that needed to happen in how we even think about financial architecture, moving away from the old model.
The old model being.
Being reliant on centralized databases, debt-based ledgers run by banks or payment processors, where your money is basically an IOU in a system you don't control.
Okay.
And shifting towards these truly decentralized self-verifying systems. That shift was absolutely necessary before any serious automated financial entity, like a corporation, could even think about using Bitcoin in a meaningful way.
Got it. So by the end of this deep dive, our goal is that you, the listener, will really understand the tech built to solve scaling, that's the Lightning Network, and also how Bitcoin's predictable money supply works the halving mechanism.
And crucially, those advanced architectural changes. Things like sophisticated scripting and this idea of non-personhood, which sounds weird, but it's what actually enables complex financial tools and even autonomous agents to operate on the network.
Okay, let's dive into part one, the BUIDL era. And maybe start with those scaling challenges, because the critics were constantly saying, they still say it, frankly, that Bitcoin just can't handle the load. It doesn't scale for global payment.
But yeah, that's been the drumbeat from day one. But one of the sources we looked at had a really insightful point about this. It noted that historically, the really disruptive networks, the ones that win in the long run, often fail to scale gracefully for decades.
That sounds counterintuitive. Fail to scale but succeed.
Well, think about the internet itself, right? It wasn't designed for Netflix or cloud gaming. It hit scaling walls constantly. Usenet, email with big attachments, voice over IP. Each time, it seemed like it was hitting a dead end.
And each time,
Builders innovated. They added new layers, new protocols on top. HTTP for the web, SMTP for email, RTP for streaming. Bitcoin was facing that same kind of evolutionary pressure. The base layer had constraints for a reason.
right, let's talk about that reason. Why is scaling on the main Bitcoin blockchain layer 1 such a tricky issue? Why not just, make the blocks bigger to fit more transactions?
Because it hits the core value proposition. Decentralization. The whole security model relies on the fact that lots of ordinary people, not just giant corporations, can run a full node. Full node is your own independent, self-verifying copy of the entire Bitcoin transaction history.
Okay, so you need lots of nodes for resilience and censorship resistance.
Exactly. Now, if running a full node suddenly requires, say, massive bandwidth like a data center or terabytes and terabytes of storage right now, then who can afford to do it? Only big players.
And then you're back to centralization. You've just recreated the old system.
Precisely. So the design goal is to keep the resource requirements for running a full node relatively low so that decentralization remains possible.
So what specifically makes running a node resource intensive? What's the main burden we need to manage?
A big part of it is the size of what's called the UTXO set, the Unspent Transaction Output Database. Think of it as a list of every single piece of Bitcoin, every fragment that exists and hasn't been spent yet.
Okay, so every available coin or part of a coin.
Right. Every transaction consumes some existing UTXOs and creates new ones. Now, if you start flooding the network with millions of tiny, almost valueless transactions, what the community calls dust, you force every single one of those thousands of full node operators around the world to track all these new, tiny, uneconomical bits of data forever.
Ah, I see. So it's not just the transaction volume now, it's the permanent baggage, the ever-growing database that every node has to maintain and validate.
That's the core tension. So protecting decentralization means being very careful about layer 1 capacity. And that necessity, that deliberate constraint, is what really drove the push for efficient solutions off the main chain.
Which brings us neatly to the star of this BUIDL era.
Payment channels and the Lightning Network. LN for short. This was the community's big answer to scaling for high-throughput, low-cost payments.
Okay, break down payment channels for us. What are they, fundamentally?
All right, so a payment channel is basically a clever cryptographic agreement between two parties. It lets them exchange potentially thousands, even millions of Bitcoin transactions directly between themselves off the main blockchain.
Off-chain, so not recorded on layer 1.
Not immediately. They happen instantly between the two participants. But, and this is the crucial part, it's set up in a trustless way. That means either party can, at any moment, decide to close the channel and settle the final balance back onto the main Bitcoin blockchain, layer 1, without needing the other person's permission or cooperation.
Okay, so it's like opening a private tab between two people. They pass IOUs back and forth super fast, but either one can cash out the final balance onto the public ledger whenever they want.
It's a pretty good analogy, yeah. And technically, they're a specific type of a broader idea called state channels, where the state being updated off-chain is just the Bitcoin balance between the two parties.
Now, the trustless part sounds key. If I'm doing hundreds of these off-chain payments with someone, what stops them from being sneaky and trying to broadcast an old channel state to the blockchain? You know, one where they had more money and I had less. How is that prevented without a referee?
Great question. That's where the cryptographic cleverness comes in. The security relies on a few interlocking pieces. First, you need an on-chain transaction to start things off. That's the funding transaction. It locks the initial Bitcoin from both parties into a shared address on the blockchain, basically opening the channel.
Okay, funding is on-chain. Sets the stage.
Right. Then, all the subsequent payments back and forth, those are done using commitment transactions. These are valid Bitcoin transactions signed by both parties reflecting the current balance, but crucially, they are not broadcast to the network immediately. They're just held by the participants.
So we're exchanging signed updates, but keeping them private for now. How do we stop the cheating with old ones?
This is the magic ingredient. Asymmetric revocable commitments. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's the core innovation that makes these channels secure and allows them to stay open potentially forever.
Asymmetric revocable commitments. Okay, walk me through it.
So every time you and I agree on a new balance in our channel, say I pay you a small amount, we create and sign a new commitment transaction reflecting that new balance.
Sure.
But at the same time, we exchange a special piece of cryptographic data, like a secret key, that effectively revokes the previous commitment transaction.
How does exchanging a key revoke the old transaction?
Think of it like this. That special key sometimes called a revocation key or a breach remedy key, is linked specifically to that immediately preceding transaction state. If I try to cheat you later by broadcasting that old revoked commitment transaction, the one where I unfairly had a higher balance,
Yeah.
you will immediately see that transaction pop up on the blockchain. And because you hold the revocation key for that specific old state, you can instantly create and broadcast a special penalty transaction.
A penalty transaction, what does it do?
Thanks to the way the channel was set up, your penalty transaction, using that revocation key I gave you, allows you to immediately claim all the money locked in the channel, the entire balance, both my share and yours.
Wow. So if I try to cheat by broadcasting an old state, I don't just fail, I lose everything in the channel.
Exactly. It's designed as an extreme deterrent. The cryptography creates an automated enforcement mechanism where the penalty for attempted cheating is total financial loss within that channel. It makes trying to cheat incredibly irrational.
Yeah, that's powerful. An automated judge and jury built into the code. But wait, does that mean I constantly have to be watching the main blockchain layer 1 just in case my channel partner tries to broadcast an old state? That sounds like a lot of work for an average user.
That's a valid point. It does create an operational challenge. You, or something acting for you, needs to monitor the chain for these potential breach attempts. But users typically don't do this manually.
So how does it work in practice?
The ecosystem developed the concept of watchtowers. These can be third-party services or even just software you run whose job is specifically to monitor the blockchain for transactions related to your channels. If they detect an attempted cheat using a revoked state, the watchtower can automatically broadcast the penalty transaction on your behalf.
Ah, so I can delegate the monitoring. Does the watchtower need access to my private keys or my funds?
Nope. That's the beauty of it. The watchtower only needs specific data related to potential breaches, not your main keys. It can execute the penalty without being able to steal your funds itself. This makes the system practical without requiring every user to be glued to a block explorer 24/7.
Okay, that handles the peer-to-peer security. Very clever. But the vision wasn't just isolated channels, it was the Lightning Network, right? Connecting everyone, even if they don't have a direct channel open between them.
Precisely. You don't want to have to open a separate channel with every single person or merchant you might ever want to pay. That wouldn't scale socially or economically, so you need routing.
How do you route payments across multiple channels securely? If I pay you through Bob, how do we ensure Bob doesn't just steal the money halfway through?
That's where the next piece of the puzzle comes in. Hash time lock contracts, or HTLCs. These are another type of smart contract built into Bitcoin.
HTLCs.
HTLCs are what allow us to string together multiple payment channels, end-to-end, to create a multi-hop path. So Alice can pay Charlie by routing the payment through Bob, even if Alice only has a channel with Bob and Bob only has one with Charlie. And crucially, Bob cannot steal the funds in transit.
Why not? What stops Bob?
It works using a secret and a deadline. Alice, the sender, generates a random secret value, let's call it R. She doesn't reveal R yet, but she calculates its cryptographic hash, let's call it H.
Okay, she has a secret R and a public hash H.
Right. She then offers a payment to Bob, but it's locked with two conditions. Bob can only claim the payment from Alice if he can provide the secret R that matches the hash H, and he must do it before a certain time expires, say 2 days.
Okay, locked payment to Bob.
Now, Bob wants to get paid, so he offers a similar locked payment to Charlie, the final recipient. This payment from Bob to Charlie is locked using the same hash H, but with a shorter time lock, say 1 day.
Ah, the time locks are nested.
Exactly. Charlie, the final recipient, knows the secret R. Alice probably sent it to him through some other means, like an encrypted message, as part of the invoice. To claim the funds from Bob, Charlie reveals the secret R just before his deadline.
And when Charlie reveals R to Bob?
Bob instantly learns the secret R. Now Bob can turn around and use that same secret R to claim his payment from Alice before his longer deadline expires. The secret R effectively cascades backward along the payment path, unlocking each hop.
And if something goes wrong, if Charlie doesn't reveal R?
If Charlie doesn't reveal R before his deadline, the locked payment from Bob to Charlie expires, and the funds automatically return to Bob. Then, because Bob never learned R, the locked payment from Alice to Bob expires, and the funds return safely to Alice. The whole payment chain either settles atomically almost instantly, or it fails safely, and no intermediary can steal the funds.
So the intermediate nodes, like Bob, act purely as conditional routers. They only get paid if they successfully forward the payment and learn the secret, making it trustless.
Precisely. Bob is just a courier incentivized to deliver the package, not someone who can open it.
So pulling it all together, this quiet BYDL period from roughly 2018 onwards delivered this layer 2 solution, the Lightning Network. And the benefits were huge, right?
Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
We're talking potentially millions of transactions per second across the network, near instant settlement times measured in milliseconds, incredibly low fees, making tiny micropayments possible.
Things you just couldn't do feasibly on layer 1.
Right. And improved privacy, too. Because the routing uses an onion routing protocol, similar to Tor, called Sphinx. Each node in the payment path only knows the node immediately before it and the node immediately after it. They don't know the original sender or the final destination.
Fascinating. So this was the engineer's sophisticated answer to that persistent Bitcoin doesn't scale criticism. Build a highway on top for the fast traffic.
Yeah, while the engineers were heads down perfecting Lightning on Layer 2, Layer 1, the base Bitcoin blockchain, was marching steadily towards the next iteration of its most fundamental economic feature.
Ah, you mean the halving.
Exactly, the halving. This is where the protocol itself acts like a completely predictable, automated central bank. It's maybe the defining characteristic of Bitcoin's monetary policy.
Okay, let's quickly refresh the basics of mining first, just to set the stage for the halving.
Sure. So mining serves two critical functions. One, it's how new transactions get confirmed and added to the blockchain, securing the history. Two, it's how new Bitcoins are created and introduced into circulation. It decentralizes both transaction clearing and currency issuance, replacing the need for central banks or mints.
And miners are incentivized to do this computationally expensive work because they get rewards.
Correct. They get rewarded in two ways. They collect the transaction fees attached to the transactions they include in a block, and they receive a block subsidy, a certain amount of brand new Bitcoin, created out of thin air according to the protocol's rules.
Okay, and the halving directly impacts that block subsidy. So what exactly is the halving event? Why is it such a big deal, especially for long-term investors?
The halving is an event that's literally baked into the Bitcoin code. It's automatic, it's predictable, nobody controls it. The protocol is designed with algorithms that constantly adjust the mining difficulty to ensure that, on average, a new block is found and added to the chain roughly every 10 minutes.
Regardless of how much computing power joins or leaves the network.
Right. The difficulty adjusts. Now, the halving rule states that every 210,000 blocks, which, at 10 minutes per block, works out to almost exactly every 4 years the block subsidy, the amount of new Bitcoin created with each block, gets cut precisely in half.
Automatically slashed by 50%.
Automatically. It's a pre-programmed, unchangeable aspect of the monetary policy, right from the Genesis block. It completely removes human decision-making or political whim from the supply schedule.
Which is kind of the whole point, isn't it? Mathematical predictability.
It is. The ultimate goal is to create absolute scarcity. By repeatedly halving the issuance rate, the total number of Bitcoins that can ever exist is mathematically capped at just under 21 million coins. This diminishing rate of new supply is fundamental to Bitcoin's identity as a potential store of value.
Can you walk us through the numbers? How did the subsidy decrease over time?
Sure. When Bitcoin first launched, the block subsidy was 50 Bitcoins per block. Pretty high. Then the first halving happened in late 2012, and boom, it dropped to 25 Bitcoins per block.
Okay.
The second halving was in mid-2016, cut it again to 12.5 Bitcoins per block. And then, right in the middle of this period we're focusing on, May 2020, we had the third halving. That dropped the subsidy to 6.25 Bitcoins per block, where it sits today, actually, until the next one.
That third halving in 2020 must have felt significant. Coming after the crypto winter, it was like the code just kept executing its plan, regardless of market sentiment.
Hugely significant, both technically proving the protocol worked as designed yet again, and psychologically for investors. It reinforced that predictable scarcity.
And the long-term picture is even starker, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the sources pointed out something quite startling. By around block number 1,411,200, which is estimated to happen sometime around the year 2035. Give or take, a full 99% of all the Bitcoins that will ever exist will have already been mined and be in circulation.
Wow. 99% issued by roughly 2035. So in just over a decade from now, the new supply entering the market becomes almost negligible.
Exactly. The inflation rate asymptotically approaches zero. After that point, the miner's revenue will come almost entirely from transaction fees, not the block subsidy. The supply becomes almost perfectly inelastic.
That's the core monetary significance then. Bitcoin isn't just scarce, it's predictably disinflationary by its very code, trending towards eventually being deflationary if coins get lost. A stark contrast to, well, pretty much every government-issued currency.
A complete contrast to the discretionary, often inflationary or expansionary policies of central banks around the world. That predictability is a massive draw for long-term capital.
But what stops a powerful group, say, a majority of miners or influential developers, from just deciding, hey, let's change the code and increase the supply? If it's just code, can it be changed?
That's where the consensus mechanism comes back in. It's not just miners who enforce the rules. It's every single full node operator independently verifying every transaction and every block against the established rule set.
Okay.
So if a group of miners tried to create a block that awarded themselves more than the allowed 6.25 Bitcoin subsidy, or tried to change the 21 million limit,
The nodes would reject it.
every full node running the standard Bitcoin software would instantly see that block as invalid. You'd reject it, ignore it. It wouldn't become part of the accepted blockchain history. Those extra coins would effectively not exist in the eyes of the network consensus.
So nobody can force you to accept any Bitcoins that were created beyond the expected issuance rate. That's a powerful guarantee.
It's fundamental. You're investing in mathematical certainty and code-enforced scarcity, not trusting the future decisions of a committee or government. That's why serious, long-term holders pay such close attention to the halving cycle.
Okay, so we have the tech getting better with Lightning and this rock-solid, predictable monetary policy with the halving. As these foundations hardened, you mentioned a philosophical leap starting to happen too. People began seeing Bitcoin not just as a weird hobbyist thing, but as potentially serious financial infrastructure.
Yeah, and to really grasp that leap, you have to contrast Bitcoin's architecture with how the traditional financial system works.
How would you describe the traditional system's architecture?
Almost entirely client-server. Think about your bank account, your credit card, PayPal, Venmo. In all those systems, your money essentially exists as an entry in a database, a form of debt in a ledger that you do not control.
You're the client, asking the bank or the payment processor, the server, for permission to access or move your money.
Exactly. Every single interaction is mediated and controlled by that central third party. They are the gatekeeper.
And the problem with having a central gatekeeper server is...
Two big problems: single point of failure and single point of control or censorship. We saw this starkly back in the early 2010s, remember? Organizations like WikiLeaks suddenly found themselves completely cut off from donations via Visa, MasterCard, PayPal.
Right, not because of a court order, but because the payment companies faced pressure and just flipped the switch off.
Exactly. Extrajudicial pressure, as some called it. That's the power the central server holds. Bitcoin's architecture was designed from the ground up as a direct response, a rebuttal to that model.
So how does Bitcoin's architecture fundamentally differ?
The absolute core difference is this. In Bitcoin, the only thing that matters for spending funds is possessing the correct, private cryptographic key that can create a valid digital signature for a transaction.
Possession of the key is control.
It is control. There's no central server you need to log into, no intermediary you need to ask for permission. If you can produce a valid signature using the key associated with some unspent Bitcoin, UTXOs, the network will accept your transaction as valid. Control is purely cryptographic, not based on identity or permission from an institution.
Okay, so control is decentralized via keys. What about the transactions themselves? How are they communicated?
This is another fascinating part. A Bitcoin transaction is really just a piece of data, a digitally signed message. It basically says, I authorize moving these specific unspent coins, UTXOs, to this new address. Critically, the transaction itself contains no sensitive data like your name, address, or account number in the traditional sense.
The raw transaction isn't inherently confidential information that needs hiding.
Correct, which means it's incredibly resilient to how it's transmitted. You could, in theory, broadcast a valid, signed Bitcoin transaction over completely insecure public Wi-Fi, shout it over radio, send it via satellite. I mean, people have even transmitted them via mesh networks or, theoretically, smoke signals or light pulses.
Seriously? Smoke signals?
Well, maybe a bit dramatic, but the point is, because the message itself doesn't contain anything secret that can be compromised by eavesdropping, the transmission channel doesn't need to be secure. If the signed message gets to any node connected to the network, it can be validated and potentially included in a block. The security is intrinsic to the message via the digital signature, not dependent on the channel.
That self-verifying nature, that seems like the seed of the bigger architectural leap you mentioned earlier, the path towards more advanced uses.
Exactly, because the system only cares about a valid signature from a key, not who or what holds the key. It removes the traditional requirement for personhood in finance.
Okay, unpack that. Removes the requirement for personhood. What does that mean practically?
In the traditional financial world, every account, every transaction ultimately has to be tied back to a legal person, either an individual human or a legally constructed entity like a trust or a corporation, which itself is designed and controlled by humans. Ownership requires identity.
Right. Banks need KYC, know your customer.
Bitcoin doesn't. The protocol is blind to identity. It only asks, can this key produce a valid signature for these funds?
So, who could hold the key?
That's the mind-bending implication. A piece of software could hold the key. An autonomous software agent, maybe an AI running on a server somewhere, could control Bitcoin directly without any human needing to intervene or authorize its transactions.
A machine could have its own money and spend it.
Yes, it could function as an independent, financially sovereign entity, making payments, receiving income, managing its own little treasury.
That sounds like science fiction, but it opens up possibilities that are just impossible in the old client-server model, right? For automation, for escrow, for entirely new kinds of services.
Totally. Think about that thought experiment people sometimes use, the self-owning car.
Okay.
Imagine combining self-driving car technology with a ride-sharing platform
Yeah.
and Bitcoin micropayments. You could potentially have a car that literally owns itself.
Yeah.
It drives passengers around, collects fares directly into its own Bitcoin wallet using Lightning, and then uses those funds autonomously to pay for its own electricity or gas, its insurance premiums, its lease payments, maybe even scheduling and paying for its own maintenance appointments, all without a human owner in the traditional sense.
The car itself is the economic entity. It doesn't need a bank account registered to a person or company, no CEO signing checks.
Precisely. That kind of autonomous economic agent is simply inconceivable in a system where every financial action must map back to a legally verified person or corporation. Bitcoin's architecture, which really solidified during this 2018-2020 period, provides the necessary foundation for this. And it's the same principle of self-sovereign, programmatically controlled value that underpins the sophisticated custody solutions needed for serious corporate treasury adoption.
Okay, so this idea of autonomous value and corporate adoption is powerful. But for big companies or even complex smart contracts to actually use Bitcoin reliably, especially with large sums, they needed practical tools. The philosophy was there, but the tech needed to support it robustly, right?
Absolutely. If you're a treasurer at a major corporation managing potentially billions, you can't just send Bitcoin like sending an email. You have complex security requirements, multi-party approvals.
Like needing, say, 3 out of 5 executives to sign off on any large outgoing payment.
Exactly. That kind of rule, a multi-signature requirement, can be expressed in Bitcoin's scripting language. But the scripts themselves can get really big and complex. We're talking potentially thousands of bytes of data for a complicated rule.
And big strips mean?
High transaction fees on layer 1, because fees are generally based on data size. Plus, it adds more data burden for all those full nodes to validate and store. So efficiency was a major concern for enterprise use.
Right. How did the developers tackle that size and fee issue for complex rules?
The key was to use hash functions cleverly again. To find a way to represent a big, complex spending rule with just a small, compact piece of data. This led to the development and widespread adoption of P2SH, which stands for Pay-to-Script Hash. It was formalized in BIP 13.
Pay-to-script hash, P2SH, what does it let you do?
P2SH allows someone setting up a receiving address to define a complex spending condition, like that 7 of 10 multi-sig rule, or maybe something even more intricate, but then hash that entire complex script down into a short, standard-looking 20-byte hash.
Okay, so the complexity is hidden behind a hash.
Right, and that 20-byte hash is then encoded into a Bitcoin address. P2SH addresses are the ones you might recognize that start with the number 3.
Ah, the 3 addresses. So when I send Bitcoin to a 3 address, I'm not sending it to a simple public key. I'm sending it to the hash of a complex script.
Exactly. You, the sender, only need to include that small 20-byte hash in your transaction. Super efficient, low fee for you. The actual bulky script, the details of the 7 of 10 rule, only needs to be revealed and put on the blockchain later when the person receiving the funds actually wants to spend them.
That makes a lot of sense. Reduces the upfront data load significantly. And this is crucial for businesses setting up secure custody.
Absolutely essential. P2SH made complex multi-signature setups practical. And the protocol rules for P2SH multisig allow for up to 15 keys in the script, meaning you could set up, say, a highly secure 15 of 15 signature requirement for controlling enormous corporate treasuries. It provided the tools for sophisticated governance.
Okay, so P2SH helped with efficiency and complexity. What about basic security, like typos? If you're moving millions, mistyping one character in an address could be catastrophic. Were the old address formats good enough?
That was definitely a concern. The original Bitcoin address format called Base58 check was okay, but it wasn't foolproof against typos. And like you said, for high-value corporate transfers, okay isn't good enough. You need maximum reliability.
So how was that improved?
This was tackled through a couple of related upgrades. First came Segregated Witness, SegWit, primarily known for helping scaling and fixing transaction malleability. SegWit, defined in BIPs 141 and 143, basically reorganized transaction data and, importantly, introduced the necessary structure to support newer, better address formats.
Okay, SegWit paved the way.
For the modern address formats we use today, BALO22 and its later refinement, BES32 meters. These are the native SegWit addresses, the ones that usually start with BC1.
Ah, the BC1 addresses, they look different. What's special about them?
A few things. Visually, they only use numbers and lowercase letters, deliberately avoiding uppercase letters and also excluding characters that look similar can cause confusion, like 0 and O or 1 and L. That alone helps reduce manual entry errors.
That's smart. But is there a deeper security benefit?
Oh, yes. The real magic is in the underlying math of the BES32 encoding. It includes a much more powerful error detection checksum. It's mathematically guaranteed to detect any single character error and almost any error involving up to 4 mistyped, added, or deleted characters.
Guaranteed detection for most common typos.
Guaranteed. It's vastly more reliable than the old Base58 check format. When you're talking about potentially irreversible, high-value transactions for corporate funds, that level of built-in error detection is absolutely critical. It provides institutional-grade reliability against simple human error.
Okay, efficiency with P2SH, reliability with BEC32. What about privacy for these corporate setups? Did P2SH multisig reveal anything sensitive?
It did reveal something. While P2SH hid the script until the funds were spent, the moment those funds were spent, the full script, like the 7 of 10 rule, had to be revealed on the blockchain for validation.
So anyone looking at the blockchain could see the internal governance structure of that company's wallet, like how many signers they required.
Exactly. Which might be sensitive competitive information or reveal security practices you'd rather keep private.
So was there an evolution beyond P2SH for multisig?
Yes. This leads us to more advanced techniques, particularly scriptless multi-signatures. These leverage newer cryptographic constructions, especially those related to Schnorr signatures, which were activated on Bitcoin later via the Taproot upgrade. But the groundwork and concepts were developing during this period.
Scriptless multi-signatures, how are they different?
The key advantage is incredible privacy. Using some clever cryptography, like music protocols, multiple participants can collaborate to produce what looks like a single standard Schnorr signature that validates the transaction.
Wait, so you could have, say, 10 executives needing to sign off, but the final transaction on the blockchain looks exactly the same as if just one person signed it with a regular key.
That's precisely the breakthrough. The combined multi-signature is indistinguishable from a simple single signature on the blockchain.
Wow, what does that mean for privacy?
It means you don't reveal the complexity, you don't reveal that it was a multi-signature transaction, you don't reveal how many parties were involved, the M or the N and M of N,
Wow.
and you don't reveal which specific parties actually signed. It looks just like any other simple payment.
That's a massive privacy gain for corporate or complex custody arrangements. You can have incredibly intricate internal rules without broadcasting your security setup to the entire world.
Exactly. It allows sophisticated, trustless coordination while preserving privacy. This development of scriptless techniques was another crucial piece of the maturation puzzle, providing the tools needed for serious entities to use Bitcoin without compromising operational security.
So this quiet build era wasn't just patching things. It was about building truly enterprise-grade features, efficiency, robust error checking, and finally, sophisticated privacy for complex operations. Okay, so all this deep technical work is happening. Lightning is maturing for scaling, the halving ensures predictable scarcity, and these new tools like P2SH, BEC32, and concepts like scriptless multisig are providing the security, efficiency, and privacy needed for serious use. The stage was really being set, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. The foundational layers, both technical and monetary, had become significantly more robust and sophisticated compared to the early, more volatile days. And the smart money, the more forward-thinking institutional and corporate players, were starting to notice that maybe Bitcoin wasn't just internet funny money anymore.
And then in August 2020 came this. Well, this bombshell announcement. The shot heard round the corporate world, as some called it.
Yeah, that was the moment. MicroStrategy, which is a well-established, publicly traded business intelligence software company, announced something pretty much unprecedented.
Led by their CEO, Michael Saylor, what did they announce?
They announced that they were officially adopting Bitcoin as their primary treasury reserve asset.
Let's just pause on that. Primary treasury reserve asset. We need to really emphasize how significant this was.
Huge. This wasn't some small crypto startup. It wasn't a hedge fund making a speculative bet. This was a mainstream NASDAQ-listed tech company, around for decades, deciding to take the cash sitting on its balance sheet as corporate savings and convert a huge chunk of it into Bitcoin.
Instead of holding US dollars or short-term bonds like basically every other company?
Exactly. They were swapping traditional fiat reserves for Bitcoin. It was a genuine paradigm shift in corporate treasury management.
What was their reasoning? Why make such a radical move?
Their stated rationale, articulated very forcefully by Michael Saylor, was actually quite simple, but profoundly challenging to the status quo. They looked at holding large amounts of cash on their balance sheet, especially in a world of near-zero interest rates and ongoing monetary expansion.
And they saw it as a melting ice cube.
Precisely. They saw cash as actively losing purchasing power over time due to inflation. They analyzed various assets and concluded that Bitcoin, with its programmed scarcity and decentralized nature, represented a superior long-term store of value. A non-sovereign store of value, as Saylor often termed it, that was better than cash for preserving shareholder value over the long run.
So importantly, this wasn't about day trading or trying to time the market for a quick profit.
No, not at all. They were very clear this was a long-term strategic decision. Their first big purchase was $250 million worth, and they framed it as protecting their corporate treasury from the debasement of fiat currencies. They saw Bitcoin as a technology solution to an economic problem.
And what made the MicroStrategy move so impactful, beyond just the sheer size of the initial investment, was how they approached it, right? Especially Michael Saylor's role.
Absolutely. Saylor didn't just buy Bitcoin quietly. He became an incredibly vocal corporate evangelist for it. He essentially provided a public playbook for other companies thinking about doing the same thing.
How so? What did that playbook involve?
They meticulously documented and shared their process, how they handled the legal aspects, the accounting standards, which were tricky, how they chose institutional-grade custodians, how they structured board approvals. They basically went through all the hurdles a public company would face and showed, step by step, how they navigated them.
So they effectively de-risked it for everyone else who was watching. They answered all the, but how would we actually do this questions.
Exactly. They took Bitcoin treasury management out of the realm of the theoretical or the Wild West and demonstrated a compliant, audited, enterprise-ready path. It made the idea instantly more palatable, more feasible for other CFOs and corporate boards.
And did other companies follow suit relatively quickly?
We certainly saw a wave of interest in smaller allocations from other tech companies and even some more traditional firms starting to dip their toes in the water in the months that followed. MicroStrategy's move seemed to break a psychological barrier. It signaled that the technical maturity and the philosophical understanding had reached a point where institutions could no longer just ignore Bitcoin. The quiet build had resulted in something ready for the boardroom.
Yeah, MicroStrategy really kicked the door open for corporate adoption. But in parallel, during that same 2018-2020 timeframe, the actual infrastructure needed to smoothly onboard large-scale institutional capital was also maturing really quickly.
Because it's one thing for a tech CEO like Saylor to go all in. It's another for, say, a conservative pension fund or a university endowment to get involved, right? They need different things.
Totally different needs. They operate under strict regulations, fiduciary duties, and they need familiar, compliant ways to gain exposure within their existing financial frameworks. They aren't typically set up to directly buy and custody crypto themselves.
So it wasn't just about buying coins on an exchange. They needed products and services tailored to them.
Exactly. And we saw huge growth in products designed specifically for that market.
Yeah.
The prime example during this period was probably Grayscale's Bitcoin Trust, or GBTC.
Ah, yes, GBTC. How did that help institutions?
GBTC basically offered shares in a trust that held a large amount of Bitcoin. So investors weren't buying Bitcoin directly, they were buying shares representing Bitcoin, held within a traditional trust structure. And crucially, these GBTC shares could often be bought and sold through standard brokerage accounts, held in retirement accounts like IRAs, and managed by traditional financial advisors.
So it acted like a bridge. It wrapped Bitcoin in a familiar legal and financial structure that legacy institutions understood and could handle.
Precisely. Before GBTC became widely accessible, if you were a registered investment advisor and your client wanted Bitcoin exposure, it was a compliance nightmare. GBTC massively simplified that access, even though it came with its own complexities later on, like premiums and discounts to the underlying Bitcoin value.
But it clearly showed there was pent-up demand from that traditional investment world.
Undeniably. It proved that serious capital wanted in, if given a compliant pathway. And beyond just investment products, we also saw the grown-ups of the financial world starting to build the really heavy-duty infrastructure needed for direct institutional involvement, especially custody.
You're talking about the big financial incumbents stepping in.
Yes. The launch of Fidelity Digital Assets during this era was a landmark event. Fidelity is one of the world's largest, most respected financial services firms. When they decided to launch a dedicated division offering institutional-grade crypto custody and trading services, it sent a massive signal.
That Bitcoin was no longer just a fringe retail phenomenon.
Exactly. It was being taken seriously at the highest levels of traditional finance.
Why is institutional custody so much more complex than just holding your own keys on a hardware wallet? What does Fidelity bring?
It's a whole different ballgame. We're talking about safeguarding potentially billions of dollars for clients who have extreme security requirements and regulatory obligations. It involves things like geographically distributed, air-gapped cold storage vaults, rigorous multi-party access controls requiring multiple internal approvals for any movement, regular independent audits, insurance. It's a massive operational undertaking.
So Fidelity offering this meant that other large institutions, pension funds, hedge funds, family offices, now had a trusted, regulated brand name partner they could use to securely hold potentially large Bitcoin allocations.
Yes. It removed a huge barrier to entry for institutions that couldn't or wouldn't self-custody at scale. It provided a credible, regulated path for securing serious sums.
Okay, so looking back at 2018, 2020, it feels like all the pieces were falling into place. You had the technical maturation with Lightning and improved addresses. You had the economic certainty reinforced by the halving. You had the corporate validation led by MicroStrategy. And finally, the institutional on-ramps being built by players like Grayscale and Fidelity.
That's the perfect summary. While the mainstream press might have still been skeptical or dismissive, behind the scenes, all the necessary components, financial, technical, regulatory bridges, were being put firmly in place by the end of 2020. The system was fully primed and ready for the next major phase of growth and adoption, fueled by serious capital inflows. #tag conclusion.
So when you look back at that 2018 to 2020 period, it really does feel like the essential, maybe even the most critical bridge in Bitcoin's journey so far.
I think that's right. It was the period where Bitcoin transitioned from being this, fascinating but somewhat chaotic and speculative adolescent
Yeah, constantly arguing about scaling and plagued by volatility.
into something far more technically robust with a clear economic identity and, frankly, starting to be recognized as a legitimate asset on the global stage.
And it happened largely during that crypto winter when everyone who wasn't deeply involved thought the whole thing was fading away.
That's often how it works, isn't it? The developers, the builders, they just used that downtime, that lack of hype, to rigorously engineer the solutions that were needed, integrating Lightning, rolling out SegWit and BIC32, refining the security models precisely when the critics were loudest about its supposed failures.
And those critics just kept missing the fundamental point, didn't they? They kept trying to frame Bitcoin as just a slightly different, maybe worse version of something they already knew, like digital gold or a payment network.
Yeah, they got stuck comparing the cost of the medium, like transaction fees or speed on layer 1, without grasping the revolutionary value of the underlying message, the decentralized, trustless, programmable, scarce base layer.
They were focused on the limitations of the foundation, while the builders were busy constructing the upper floors.
Exactly. They were defending the old, controlled, expensive financial system, the legacy medium, and failed to see that this new technology provided the raw ingredients for something entirely different. A system built, ideally, for self-sovereignty, where maybe accountability could exist for the powerful and privacy could exist for the individual user.
It really shows that consistent pattern you see with disruptive tech. The critics declare it dead or unworkable repeatedly, but the quiet, persistent work of the builders eventually wins out.
That unwavering focus during these years is what laid the groundwork.
Absolutely. By the end of 2020, You had all the key ingredients in place. You had a credible path to scaling with Lightning. You had the programmed supply shock of a halving reinforcing scarcity. And you had the sophisticated tools and infrastructure emerging for serious corporate and institutional custody. The table was set.
Which perfectly tees up our next deep dive. Because with all that groundwork laid, what happened next was pretty explosive.
So next time, we'll unpack the direct consequences of this maturation. We'll cover the massive bull run of 2021. We'll look at the truly unexpected development of nation-state adoption, focusing on El Salvador's historic move to make Bitcoin legal tender and track Bitcoin's undeniable arrival as a fixture in the global macro landscape.